Hello, everybody on the video land. I'm Andrew Ward, and today I'm joined with Rohan, Clarke, and Christophe Bur. Christophe is one of our soon-to-be members of Regen Farmers Mutual, and I've invited Christophe to share his story with us all today, because from what I've heard, and it's just the tip of the iceberg, it will be of interest to many of the people who are involved with Regen Farmers Mutual. So welcome, Christophe, and hello. How are you?
Hello. Very good. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Now, Christophe, I reckon you've got one of the most outstanding accents. It's French, isn't it?
It is. It is. Long time ago, but I guess you'll never lose that. I came here, 35 years ago now. So
I'd love to hear your background. So what does a Frenchman who 35 years later ends up being a leading regenerative farmer and how does that story come about?
It's actually a good question. Question that everybody's surprised that, I was living in Paris and having the good life and best place in the world, I still reckon, but it's Australia is the best place in the world to live. So it's the only answer. And being a farmer by tradition, my family's been in farming, sheep, but farming all for generations and generations. So put two and two together and being a cattle farmer in Australia. There you go.
And it's more than just a cattle farmer, because you've got other business interests outside of traditional, growing out heifers. Do you want to talk to us a bit about the world of Christophe? Like, what does a day in your life look like?
I've been, in addition to being and I usually say cattle and carbon farmer, because to me it's equal interest. So that's as I said, by family tradition, by taste. But I'm also an advisor. I've been a consultant in corporate life for many years as well. And I think the advising side of what I do is mostly to help others share experience and try to shift the needle on environmental topics. So it fits very well, I think, with the goals of the mutual.
Absolutely. I guess maybe for now we're going to come and definitely look at your consulting experience, but I want people to understand the cattle enterprise and your farming enterprise. So where are you in the world, and how many head are you running, and what's your farm look like for those that can't be there or haven't met you? Yeah.
It's small, 750 hectares. Heads vary enormously depending on the market, and whether we're focusing more on breeding or fattening cattle, but it varies between say 100 and 150 heads. So very small, very small operation. It's in the Maryborough area, also known as Fraser Coast, about halfway between Maryborough and Binghamton, for those who know. So say 40 kilometers inland. Burnett region is interesting because it changes very much from the coastal areas where you have a lot more rainfall, and it gets drier in the interior and shifts therefore from a lot of cropping around Bundaberg, etc. Cane cropping in Maryborough, of course, and then it gets drier and more extensive cattle farming towards Gayndah and on the inland.
Excellent. And how do you run your cattle operations? So are you doing time controlled grazing? Are you doing any pasture improvement? What are the sorts of typical activities on your farm?
Good question. We've been quite conservative because we started getting not concerned, but getting into sustainability quite a long time ago. About 10 years ago, we were starting to think about, that's good, cattle farming, excellent, but what does it do to the planet? And now it seems commonplace, but 10 years ago it wasn't that common actually. So we started thinking about that. The result on your question is that we've been quite conservative in terms of what we chose to clear, chemicals we use, fertilizer we use, improving pasture or not. So we're trying to stay as native as possible, as little fertilizer as we can. And if it wasn't for ticks, we'd be organic. Actually, so we're grass-fed certified, of course. So that's a farm. A lot of timbered area on purpose. We've cleared a lot because we have to, as every cattle farmer know. You can't grow cows on trees, literally. Although, but that's where we are. So very natural, native-looking place on purpose. That said, we haven't gone into, and I'll come back to that. That's something that we're just about to start. Actually, we haven't gone into, apart from carbon, we haven't gone into any heavy rotational grazing or changing infrastructure or trying to improve pastures for soil carbon, etc. So it's pretty much native place, untouched as much as possible, with happy cattle on it.
Wonderful. Well, that I guess brings me to the interesting part. So within your community, you're already referred to me as a bit of a leader in this space. So what are these leadership practices and how do they differ from what people are doing in your region?
It's hard to say because practices, and even at the small, medium end, are very, very, very different, right? And you've got, dare I say, very, very overgrazed property that are eroding at the rate of knots. And people that are doing the right thing. I guess what distinguishes from others, and I've spent a lot of time talking to my peers and groups and to what it means to be a carbon farmer, because we started so long ago. So I guess that's what differentiates us, is the way we look at how hard we've gone trying to develop the carbon farming side of the business and trying to help others do the same. When I said that, practices are very different. I don't think it's shifting a lot now, but I don't think for a long time people were looking at carbon farming as a business proposition. A lot of people were looking at it as, oh, it'd be great for the planet and I'll do that on the side, or it's a supplementary revenue. But I think given the carbon prices now, we can push it to the fact that it actually is a business. At $50 a ton at the moment, it is a very, very valuable business on the land in a lot of places, not in every place. If you've got lush flats, that's for cattle, but in many, many places, it's a really good business decision, good for the planet, good for you. So I guess that's what differentiates us.
And Christophe, for those, and myself included, if you could describe, I think you've done more than one transaction, but a transaction that you've done on your place, so that those people who are listening can understand, were you avoiding a deforestation, or were you planting trees? Were they natives or were they selected species? And, have you been able to selectively harvest, and what are those sort of management practices that come out of all of that? Yeah.
So the main ones that we've done, and I've actually helping others to do the same, is avoided clearing. So we've done avoided clearing. We've done one on nitrate supplements, which interestingly didn't work. And we've done 2 on soil carbon. So avoided clearing is basically making a business decision whether you should clear an area of land and put cattle on it, or keep it to carbon farm. That's the one that's is, I think, the most accessible, because it's almost no cost to do. It's not easy, I'll come back to that, but it's almost no cost to do. And then the second, probably most frequent that I've seen, and then we've done 2 of here, is soil carbon. So that will involve also changing our grazing practices, putting some infrastructure, rejuvenating pasture, to try to further improve our soil carbon and the sustainability benefits that come with that, which is, we're in a barrier reef catchment, by the way. So for us, sediment erosion is very important because that goes straight to the reef, which is not good. So plantings, rotational grazing will have an impact as well on
that. Awesome. So
we haven't
nitrate and
what we haven't done is sorry. Yeah, sorry, I would say what we haven't done is anything which is planting related. Reason being that it'll be very hard to grow anything else but native trees here, and it would be very costly. But that's very, very localized. There's plenty of other places where it would be a great thing to do, but not for us.
Yep. Okay. And I ask about that you just alluded to, the soil carbon benefit is one, but the erosion and the nitrate leakage onto the reef is another benefit. When you mentioned before, and I don't want to dwell on a failure, but just to help me understand, what didn't work when you went for the nitrate supplements transaction? Because that seems to me, if you're improving ground cover and reducing erosion, you're going to reduce the amount of nitrates getting out onto the reef, and it's quite a logic flow. So yeah, if you could talk me through that, that'd be interesting.
Yes, the nitrates one was actually not agricultural nitrate, but feeding supplements to cattle based on nitrates to reduce their methane emission. And the reason it didn't work, we started that, I don't know, that was 6 years ago, maybe, a long time ago. That was the first carbon project that we started, because the obvious thing with reducing carbon on a cattle farm is the methane, right? It didn't work simply because it wasn't a failure. It was just how would I put it? Well, it was a failure because it didn't work, but it was simply that the nitrate supplements never made it to the market in scale. I don't know whether they were non-economical to be fiddly to give to cattle. You can very easily overdose the supplements. So it was not a great idea to start with, I suppose, and that's why we just stopped doing it. But right. I'm looking forward to the other supplements, the algae base and everything that's popping up now to reduce methane. That I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential in those seaweed and other. Yeah, so thank you. And showing my ignorance there, I'd assumed that was nitrate pollution going out onto the reef as opposed to methane emissions. So, okay. Rohan, I invite you to explore any questions you might have with Christophe around the transaction, if you've got any.
I was kind of curious, Christophe, actually, whether you had any views on some of the possible funding that could be emerging under either the Labor or the Liberals. But like I noticed, the Liberals were suggesting there was money coming up your way under the Great Barrier Reef kind of protected. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Good. Yes, good.
Is there somewhere it should like?
No, that's a lot. I have no idea what funding is.
Yeah, no. I guess I was coming more from the perspective of where would you like to see it? Where would it best be spent from your perspective if we are talking about rain?
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I absolutely should. No grants and stuff like that, because it's actually I'll respond to that question directly. It's actually something that the Queensland government is doing a lot, helping farmers a lot and in the right places. But to answer your question, there's a lot more to do, because all those things are actually quite expensive to do, even on a small scale. And it's important, I think, that there is subsidy to help people start.
Oh, that's a pity. I think transmission just got lost with Christophe, but he was making some really good points there. I'm sure Christophe will come back. But while we're waiting for him, Rohan, what a fascinating fella. Why are you no longer in France? This romantic version that we all have of Paris. And he's like, yeah, no, because Australia's the best country in the world. Good to hear.
I could live in Paris. I could live in Australia.
Yeah. Maryborough wins. From Paris to Maryborough. Hello, Christophe. Can you hear us? You're on mute if you can hear us. I think you need
to... now. We lost you for a little bit.
Excellent. Thank you.
No, I'm not on mute. I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you too, but on my screen,
Sylvie?
Got you on mute.
Attends.
We've lost.
Okay. Strange.
We've lost video.
Just a second. The internet's playing up a little. The internet's playing up a. The internet's playing up a little bit. I'll just check something.
Go and feed the hamster.
It happens in Melbourne CBD as well. Don't worry. So yeah, it would be interesting to kind of just understand where the opportunities might be to kind of help direct, that this if governments are thinking about, well, okay, how do we support this? How do we support Barrier Reef? It'd be good for us to understand where the opportunities are.
Christophe, welcome back.
Can you? I had lost you again, so I missed the beginning of that sentence. Sorry, Rohan. Yes, the internet was playing up a bit. Should be okay now. Yes, Rohan. Sorry, I missed the beginning of your sentence.
Yeah. Yep. So like it's.
Oh, where is best directed GBR?
Yeah.
I think what I'm seeing is it is very hard for someone not completely across biodiversity, erosion, sediment capture, environmental accounting to actually start a project with GBR benefits. So I think that because you have to go into, how do you measure the co-benefits, etc. So I think subsidies to help people get into that, maybe, I don't know what is it. Is it an advice, an advisory support, or more agronomists on the ground, or a Queensland government group of people who can actually advise on those projects? I think that's where it would be better. I have found it difficult to actually start those projects because they are very specialized. You need to understand, and they are difficult to navigate from the perspective of, PMAVs and vegetation types and what is actually a benefit, etc. So simplifying and helping people through funds or through manpower to get into those projects, I think, is what's needed for the reef. Sorry, that was a very long-winded question.
No, that's really good. And one of the things that we're kind of working through at the moment is understanding how farmers can work together to kind of learn together, but also to deliver those impacts at scale. And do you think that that's another important piece of kind of helping farmers to learn and to execute.
Totally. It's actually one of the reasons why I think that the mutual is a fantastic idea, because I've got lots of experience on carbon farming, and I can help a lot of people get into that. That's easy. But when I'm talking about biodiversity benefits, I'm not an agronomist. I would love to have an agronomist in the mutual that I can turn to and say, hey, help me get that project off the ground. Just the fact to have that network to exchange ideas in the same region, because, you know, the vegetation here is different. The blue gum is actually called a forest red gum 200 kilometers from here. So it's things like that. What's a blue gum flat? What are the characteristics of a blue gum flat? How can you improve it? It's a very localized knowledge as well. So I think the farmer, the mutual can actually help a lot in creating that closed network.
Yeah. So that is nice what you just described, because there's a kind of an aggregation or infrastructure at kind of a national scale in terms of understanding just markets. But then at the very local context, you know, things like biodiversity by definition are so locally kind of specific. To be able to be able to have infrastructure that supports local groups that come together, where there is some expertise as part of that group, whether it's, you know, finance, or whether it's, you know, carbon, or whether it's, you know, the agronomy. Yeah, so I can see how that works really well, and that's certainly part of what we kind of conceive is the benefit of mutual.
And I'd love to know as well, you mentioned financial, which I think is important. Also in terms of, you know, when you're trying to do a transaction on environmental benefits, how much is it worth? You know, turn to anyone who's a cattle farmer. They're a cattle farmer, but they have no idea what, you know, the 10-point improvement in the native vegetation condition. How much is that worth? Is it even, because it takes time and effort to actually realize those things, and they're great. They're fantastic for the planet, but, you know, we've got businesses to run as well. So knowing how much that is worth and whether it's worth doing would be a great help as well.
Just following that line of logic, what tools do you use currently, or what are the processes you can use currently to kind of help to understand the value of environmental outcomes?
Well, my main go-to tool is Accounting for Nature.
Yep.
And the index rating, which I think is great in terms of measuring improvement in conditions, and it's fantastic because it's extremely flexible. You can apply it, you know, to the nth degree if you want to have something which is really completely formal, you know, steel plated. But you can also use it in a very different way if you just want to know that your farm is improving and you don't want to base a transaction on it. So it's very flexible. It's super complete. It can be adapted to any formal environment. So that's my method. That's what I use in different forms. But I don't have enough visibility on the markets at a national level, for example, to being able to monetize that. So I can measure it, I can control it, I can monitor it, I can manage it, but I'd love to have some help into monetizing it.
Yeah, okay. It's just in terms of the accounting.
If that's one's goal, right? Because you can decide to do that just for the sake of it, but at least you would know what is the monetary value of it. I personally wouldn't necessarily monetize it more than what it costs me, but I don't even know if I can do that.
So for example, if the impact of your work on the property value, for example, might be an interesting lens through that. So that's not necessarily monetizing it today, but it's being captured and it's accumulating in the value of your property.
Correct.
Yeah, well, there's certainly interest in that from the property. We're seeing that in the banks and also in the property valuers that they're starting to move to understand that doing whether it's soil carbon or biodiversity projects on farm, they don't, historically it was just viewed as a negative, and the world's moved on from there. And now they're grappling with, well, what is the positive impact? How do we go about valuing it? So you can see that that's an emerging.
Excellent. That is excellent, because it'll provide an additional incentives for people to actually do it, and to start on the journey of realizing that it's actually good for your productivity. Everybody that I talk to, the first reaction is, oh, that costs a lot of money. Now it's shifting towards, well, we have to do it, but it still costs a lot of money. So when people realize that any of that, whether it's carbon farming or co-benefits, or through increasing the value of your property or monetizing it directly if you want to, when people start realizing that, it'll be a big shift in how people actually do those projects.
Yeah. Tell me, in terms of something accounting for nature, did you find, in terms of accessibility, are there things that need to be put in place in order to the farmers to be able to kind of step into that, or is it actually a reasonably accessible tool out of the box, so to speak?
So I'd say definitely reasonably accessible. It's not difficult. It's common sense. By the same token, because as I said, it's quite rigorous. It's not something that you can read a leaflet on either. It's specialized.
Yep.
Let me put it this way: it's specialized, but very, very accessible.
Cool. Sorry, Woody?
Yeah, Christophe, just to follow that up, for most people won't have had the benefit of chatting to you or emailing with you. So I happen to know that as a farmer, you've educated yourself in environmental markets earlier than most. Maybe you could share with some of the people the sorts of certifications and work you had to educate yourself in order to be in a position to make educated decisions.
I think that's a good question. Well, I am accredited for accounting for nature, which, as I said, is specialized, and the training is long, and it's a formal training that you have to pay for and register, and it's quite intense. And unforgiving in terms of mistake. So it's a good training, because that's the purpose of the training, is not to give you an accreditation like it's worth nothing. But as I said, it's accessible, it's rigorous, it's easy to use and flexible. So that was great. So that was one. Because our goal originally was to, and we are now, carbon neutral. I'm also a climate active registered consultant to help people be carbon neutral. And I would actually engage every farmer to consider whether they want to be. There is no market for it at the moment, which is, I think, a big flaw, but there will be. And as you were saying, Rohan, the banks are starting to recognize that there is value in sustainability credentials. I guess the market will start to recognize that there is value in producing food which is carbon neutral, which is not the case yet for beef, but it'll come. So I would engage a lot of people to become climate active, to become carbon neutral. Hence, because that was our goal, and I wanted to check firsthand whether we could be carbon neutral. I also did the training and for carbon neutral certification, and that was another thing. And then finally, for more co-benefits, I also registered as a carbon advisor with Queensland Curida. I can't remember what it stands for now, and the LRF, because of course, if there's a market at the moment for co-benefits in Queensland, it's the Land Restoration Fund. So I wanted to understand firsthand what that meant and how to, both for myself and to help people get into that co-benefit market.
Christophe, awesome that you've had such a broad education. For farmers that haven't educated themselves to that level, where in your region do they go? Like, have you got people queuing up at your door for, oh, you got 5 minutes and it lasts for a couple of hours? Or are you sharing this with your NRM and you're sharing this with your land care group? Or how does your experience out into the market?
That is such a good question. And I'd say first, because I started such a long time ago, there was the only way was to do it yourself, but I wouldn't advise necessarily anybody to actually go that route because it takes a lot of time. And as I said, I was a consultant for a long time in different forms, so that was natural to me, but I don't know, it's not probably for everyone. So to answer your question, I'm in touch with our NRM group, which is my go-to sort of group for questions and contacts and etc. Yes, I've got quite a queue knocking at the door, but it's mostly informal contacts, people who know others, friends of friends, neighbors of neighbors, and etc. It does take a lot of time, and that's at the moment that would be my a bit of a dilemma that I have in terms of spending my time. But I'd like to have a better network group. As I said before, the NRM is great, but it's not really its purpose to put people in contact. Although they're very good with it, no problem. But it's not really their group. So I'd love to have a way of having a better network and direct people and maybe more formally help them than a conversation. I'd love to, roll up the sleeves and actually help people do a project rather than just direct them. And that can only be through a more formal structure than informal relationship networks.
Yeah, great. I mean, that's it with a lot of experiences from leading farmers that we've spoken to as well, is that, they're not usually consultants or coaches or advisors, but they have got this information which is coming into vogue and people are approaching them. And the workload of that inbound inquiry is starting to affect their actual ability to do their farm operations. And it's kind of a good thing in that it shows that the market is growing, but I'm not sure that they're wanting to opt out of being farmers. And so creating a network that's fit for purpose and allows farmers to exchange peer-to-peer, I think is one of the freakishly good opportunities around the Regen Farmers Mutual. We have gone a bit off track, but I would like to try and understand better. So over the last 10 years through the practices, avoided clearing and the soil carbon projects, and how have you seen your land, your natural asset base move? And have you got any data to verify those outcomes, or is it all subjective?
That's why I mentioned accounting for nature, because that was the intention. It was for me to actually put data behind it. Just reading what's on the screen. We will make the farm carbon neutral. We're not formally certified yet by Climate Active. We are in effect, but not yet. Can't use the logo yet. So to come back to your question, well, the only data that we have is that we're going to generate about 3.8 tons of carbon credits per hectare per year over the carbon area, and that is good because it's the basis of that underpins us being carbon neutral. In terms of the other co-benefits, we're just starting to put them into place, so we won't see the change before another probably another 3 to 4 years. And that's one thing that actually I think is important for people to understand, is that those things take a long time. It's funny because 4 or 5 years ago, in a flash, you turn around and go, oh, yeah, that's it, I've done it. But don't think that you're going to be able to do anything in terms of environmental improvement in 6 months. And we live in a world now that's so used to, oh yeah, I'm going to do that in 2 months down the track. No, it actually takes years. So we can see that the benefits will be there. We can see that the benefits are going to be real. I'm actually looking at them at the moment. For the very few things that we've put in place, it's starting to show. There's also counterfactual. When we decided not to use fertilizer, for example, we said, oh, you know, how is the pasture going to be nutritious enough, and how is the cattle going to fare? And actually, they're doing very well. So we don't actually need fertilizer that we used to. There hasn't been a great drop in the pasture condition. Again, it's where we are. It's a type of grass that we have that allows us to do that. If you stop fertilizing and you're hoping to grow, you know, grass, you know, 50 centimeter high and lush and green, no, that's not going to work. So it's a complete package that you have to adopt, but it does work. And certainly we haven't seen any loss of profitability at the farm at all, and actually expect to improve it overall. There's a great method that we're using or starting to use, but we're not registering formally for, which is the beef herd management method from the ERF, which is a great guide in itself to how you can reduce your carbon footprint and improve your herd management without necessarily registering it as a project. We tried to register it as so we looked at registering it as a project, but we were too small in terms of scale for that. We wouldn't warrant the cost and the audits and etc. So, yeah.
Just quickly, Christophe, what was the gap between your scale and the scale required? So
enormous. I mean, it's a method that has small incremental benefits. So it wouldn't be worth the costs below 1,000 or 1,500 heads. So we're 10 times too small.
Yeah.
But that will be the case for a lot of people. Nevertheless, it's still worth doing because it still does reduce your carbon footprint. But you just can't rely on it to absorb the costs of registering a project, auditing a project, etc., etc.
Gotcha.
This might be a silly question, but have you found you've had efficiencies of application? So as you've gone through accounting for nature, it helped you become climate active easier, or once you've done your avoided clearing, you know, the different, are you getting efficiencies from repetition, or do you have to start from, you know, day dot again each time?
No, definitely, because those tools are the essential ones, and you use them on every project. So there's familiarity first. Once you've done an ERF project, the first time the application is, what the hell's going on? I don't understand. But the second one's easy. The third one is a piece of cake. So it's not interestingly difficult. It's just new. So there's definitely economies of scale in terms of the repetition. The tools, again, are always the same. Accounting for nature, you can apply to so many different things. Carbon neutrality, I mean, the carbon inventory is a carbon inventory. It's not that different. The figures are different. Some things are different. You've got to be careful that you capture everything, but it's not massively different. So there's absolutely economies of scale in doing multiple projects. Absolutely.
So I guess that goes to one of the heart of the value proposition of the mutual, and one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. It wasn't about data sensitivity. It was about your experiences with farmers and them cooperating. So at the heart of the mutual is two ideas. One, that smaller farmers can get together and get scale, which helps them attract buyers who want to buy at a certain scale. And the other one is that, they can share costs of registration and get peer-to-peer learning from one another. But then you do hear in market that farmers are the least cooperative bunch of people on earth. And I wanted to, match that with your world experience. Are the farmers that you interact with typically good at cooperating, or do they lack the skills, tools, familiarity, resources with cooperating?
That's an interesting question. I'd say, are farmers good at cooperating? Hell no. Why? Not because they're not cooperative by nature, but it's lack of time. I mean, farming is pretty damn busy, and it's constant. Cooperating, you need to set some time aside. But very often something happened. Gosh, the cattle broke the fence. I gotta go. You gotta go now. When something happens, it's now. So it's not an occupation because of business and because of the real-time nature of it that makes it easy. One of my neighbors, running starting a carbon project, and it's so hard to get some time together. Especially in summer, where you're busy from 5 o'clock in the morning to 7 at night, because it's a time of year to do it. The time of year where the grass are growing, but unfortunately the weeds as well. So I think farmers are cooperative, very by nature. Very, we help each other all the time. Hey, can you give me a hand with that? Oh, I'm going to burn that paddock. Can you come and give a hand? Can you lend me that? Do you have a mother for that calf whose mother died? There's a lot of cooperation going on, but it's the nature of the job that prevents it from happening. If it's not core business, it'll be hard to find time.
Thank you. That puts farmers as extremely busy and not socially awkward.
That's true. That's true.
All right. And my other question, Christophe, and I'm aware that time's marching on and you've been very generous, is, a lot of reticence exists in the market about environmental income streams, whether they're green finance or green provenance into your crops or carbon or biodiversity, because a lot of farmers are anxious, I believe, about getting into a market where it doesn't leave the farm. So you grow a ton of wheat, you sell a ton of wheat, it's left the farmers a ton of wheat, you're going to get paid. You understand that transaction. In environmental markets, nothing's leaving the farm, and people aren't actually buying the koala in the tree or the tree in the paddock. It's not leaving the farm. It's only being paid for because the people who buy it believe that it's on the farm and it has a verifiable. So how much of a barrier was that technology for yourself personally, moving to that level of record management and digital record management? And how much of a barrier do you see the tech barrier being alongside the barrier of just moving to practices that are regenerative and moving the needle on carbon and biodiversity?
I have two really good questions. The first one is about the technology is true, and it seems odd at first to say I'm going to have to formally record on a system a piece of land that I know so well. And sometimes, you're looking at satellite imagery and you go, no, this is not at all how it is. The reality on the ground is sometimes different or more granular than what you have in digital tools. And reconciling the two is sometimes hard. You go, why would I need to put, that tree in the paddock? I know it's there. I can see it. I see it every day. So necessity of digital tools is not obvious. And to be fair, so far they do exist, but they've been very fragmented and difficult to get to. That's another thing that, when we were talking about training and educating yourself, the amount of information that's freely available, especially in Queensland, I can't talk really about the other states, but in Queensland, the government has a ton of information available, from satellite imagery, records, you name it, it's all available. But it's pretty hard to piece together. There's millions of different systems that are not necessarily user-friendly. So from the motivation to do it, why would I, look at it from the sky when I can go among my trees every day, to the simplicity of using it, it's hard. Now, I believe the technology is changing very fast. You've got tools like FarmLab, for example, which is dead easy to use, very simple, very useful, centralizes a lot of things, not everything, but centralizes a hell of a lot of things, and is so user-friendly. So that is changing. It won't necessarily remove the motivation. People will go, why the hell do I need to put my data in a digital format? But that's inevitable. And after a while, you realize also it's a lot easier sometimes to look at that. And there are things like, radiometry data that you can't just look at the ground. So there's a lot of reasons to do it. The tools are coming and are becoming easier. So that'll pass. And the quicker the technology becomes and the better the technology becomes, the better, by the way. I can't wait until I can have, an estimation of my soil carbon from, radiometry, rather than having to send a big truck and drill holes in my paddock. That's not quite there yet, but it'll be there. It'll make such a big difference.
And is that around cost or time to take the samplings, or what's the big sigh of relief that you'll breathe when radiometry is in place of soil cores? What will you do? Why is that such a relief? Is it the cost burden, the time burden? Yeah.
All of the above. The cost burden is significant, especially at small scale again, but even at scale, because the method development still requires you to do, well, the old but the new steel, to do quite a bit of sampling, and justifiably so. I just don't want to get into a world where the rigor and the credibility of those things are reduced. So it has to be until it's proven. But it's still a big burden financially, logistically. When I was trying to organize that last September, and then it started raining. So 2 weeks, too buggy to send a truck. I had to cancel literally the night before the truck. So the truck operator understood, but yeah, not happy, of course. And all things like that. So it's time, logistics, costs. It's a burden.
Thank you.
To come back to your original question, Nora, about the other aspect of resistance. That's going to be hard, because there's a big resistance there's such a feeling of scrutiny when you're a farmer, and it's your place, it's your backyard. I'll tell you a story about that. And it's private, it's your home. And it's a bit like you're selling your chair in your lounge room, and you can't touch it. It belongs to somebody else. It's really, really an interesting feeling that's hard to understand until you've experienced it. One day here, just to try to exemplify that feeling, one day we were here, and somebody who was doing the Great National Trail, 10 Ks from here, got lost, and basically he ended up in our backyard. And it was such a shock, and we were like, "What are you doing here?" And then we realized that we were being defensive for nothing. The guy was lost his way and just was happy to find us to put him back on his way. But the thing is, and it was like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it was such an intrusion." And we said, "Yeah, absolutely sorry. Imagine it was you're having dinner, you're in front of the television, and somebody opens the door from the balcony and comes into your laundry room and says, 'Oh, can you tell me where the nearest road is?' It was just that much of a shock, because even into the big place, it's still your backyard. So all a long way to say that feeling, and that feeling of do I want people to look into my backyard, is real, will change, but it's a real obstacle. It is a real. I feel this way, and I know a lot of people who feel even more strongly about it.
Makes sense to me. I can feel it. How far off the trail was he? Was he?
It was quite a bit. I understand, because the way the trail is, there's one place at one point in time, there's a thing that forks to our place. He was probably a good solid 7 Ks off his way. So he was glad we put him back on the right track.
Christophe, you've been so generous with your time. I'm going to hand over to Rohan for the last question, if he has one, and otherwise, just thank you very much for your time and what you've shared with us. Rohan,
Not a problem.
Christophe.
Oh, I don't have a final question. Damn it!
We should work on one of them.
Yeah, I think so. That's right.
Say hi to your mum.
The surprise question at the last minute.
I remember that Rove McManus made a format of asking people on his show 10 quick questions, and the last one was, who would you turn gay for? And you had politicians, and it made people so awkward. And then he just did it with such a cheeky smile, and he went, "Say hello to your mum for me," and he smiled, But really, he just put like Costello or Howard or someone like that right in the hot seat. Yeah. So we definitely need to work on one of them, Rohan.
You do. Absolutely.
Christophe, Rohan, thank you both for your time today. For any of those who've been watching on, enjoying this conversation, this is the first of what we hope will be weekly conversations with our membership and network of Regen Farmers Mutual. Thank you so much for your time, Christophe, and for sharing your wisdom and learning with us.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot, guys. See ya.